Sarah sat by the window, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of tea. Outside, the world moved with its usual rhythm: people walking dogs, children laughing on the sidewalks, and cars rushing past, but inside her apartment, time seemed to stand still. The quiet was heavy, almost tangible, pressing down on her chest with every tick of the clock. She glanced at the photographs on the wall, each one frozen in a moment of happiness. There was the wedding photo, James smiling broadly while she laughed with her eyes closed, the sunlight catching in her hair. There was the picture from their first trip to the mountains, where the two of them had been so close that it felt impossible for distance to ever grow between them. Yet here she was, alone, staring at the same memories that now felt almost like someone else's life. For months, she had tried to fix what felt broken. She had offered patience, understanding, and countless late-night conversations that ended in silence or frustration. Each time she had hoped for a spark of warmth, a sign that things could go back to the way they were. But the more she tried, the more she realized that love alone wasn't enough to hold someone who had stopped trying. A small voice in her head whispered that, perhaps, it was time to stop waiting, to stop hoping for a message that might never come. And yet, she hesitated. Leaving someone you love, Evan, when it's the right choice is never easy. There was still a part of her that longed for reconciliation. They had wondered if James would wake up one day and realize what they were losing. Sarah took a deep breath and let the warmth of the tea fill her hands, grounding her. She didn't know what the future held, and that uncertainty both terrified and excited her. Somewhere beneath the heartbreak, a small flicker of hope remained, hope that she could find herself again. Hope that life might still offer moments of happiness that didn't depend on anyone else. As the sun dipped lower, casting a soft, golden glow across the room, Sarah made a silent promise to herself. She would no longer wait in the shadows of what once was. She would step forward, even if it meant stepping alone. And in that quiet, fragile moment, the story of her next chapter quietly began. Sarah's apartment was quiet, but her mind was anything but. She found herself drifting back to the years she and James had shared, the early days when everything felt new and full of promise. She remembered the first time he had held her hand on a chilly autumn evening, their fingers intertwining as naturally as if they had always belonged together. The city lights reflected in his eyes, and for a moment the world had felt infinite. She smiled faintly at the memory of Sunday mornings spent in mismatched pajamas, laughing over burnt toast and spilled coffee. James had a way of making ordinary moments feel extraordinary, turning small, simple routines into treasured rituals. She remembered the time he had surprised her with tickets to a local concert. Knowing she had been stressed about work all week, she hadn't even mentioned wanting to go. He had just remembered, quietly caring in a way that felt effortless. But alongside those happy memories, there were moments of silence and unspoken words that lingered in her heart. Over time, small misunderstandings had grown into walls neither of them knew how to dismantle. The warmth of their connection had been slowly replaced by the cold ache of distance. Arguments that once would have ended in shared laughter now ended in frustration and quiet resentment. And yet, even in the toughest times, there had been glimmers of their bond. A shared look across a crowded room, a familiar joke whispered late at night, a hand placed gently on the back during moments of stress. These were the fragments of love that Sarah had held on to, even when it hurt. As she traced her finger along the frame of a photograph showing them laughing on a rainy day in the park, Sarah realized how much she had cherished the ordinary moments more than the grand gestures. It was in those small, everyday pieces of life that she had felt closest to James, felt loved in a quiet, enduring way. And yet, for all their closeness, something had always kept them apart: unspoken fears, pride, and the way life seemed to pull them in opposite directions. She wondered, quietly and with a hint of sadness, if James remembered those moments the same way she did, or if they had faded into the background of his own life. Sarah sighed and set the photograph down. Nostalgia was sweet, but it was also painful. And as the afternoon light faded, she realized that remembering was not enough. She had to decide whether to cling to the past or step forward into a future she could still shape for herself. It had been months since Sarah had made the choice to step away. Months of quiet mornings, long walks, and evenings spent lost in her own thoughts. She had begun to rebuild pieces of herself she hadn't realized were missing, discovering hobbies and little joys that had faded while she focused so much on what she had lost. Yet, no matter how much time passed, there was always a small, lingering corner of her heart that still thought of James. One crisp autumn afternoon, she was at the local farmer's market, browsing the stalls with her reusable tote, when she heard a familiar laugh. It wasn't loud or dramatic, just a warm, quiet sound, but it made her pause. She turned, and there he was, James, standing by a stand of fresh apples, looking as familiar and yet as distant as a dream she hadn't realized she'd been missing. Their eyes met, and for a moment the world seemed to slow. Sarah felt a rush of emotions: nostalgia, longing, a twinge of sorrow, and a glimmer of hope. James' expression was careful, hesitant, but there was something in his gaze that reminded her of the man who had once made ordinary moments feel extraordinary. Neither spoke at first. Instead, they simply shared a quiet acknowledgement of the past, a silent conversation that said more than words ever could. Sarah realized that this moment, so small, so unplanned, was exactly what she had needed. It reminded her that some connections, no matter how much time passes or how many walls are built, never truly disappear. James stepped closer, his voice soft and steady. "Sarah, I've thought about you every day." Her heart caught, but she stayed grounded. "I've thought about you too," she admitted, her voice gentle. "But a lot has changed." "I've changed." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I know, and I'm willing to start over if you are." Sarah felt a mixture of relief and cautious excitement. The past hadn't disappeared, it was still there, layered with all the lessons and growth they had both experienced. But now it could be a foundation rather than a weight. As they walked together through the market, talking quietly and sharing laughter once more, Sarah realized that stepping away hadn't closed the door, it had simply given them both the space to return with clearer hearts. The story of their love wasn't over. It was just beginning a new, wiser chapter filled with hope, understanding, and the quiet promise of second chances.